As I was looking from the 2022 California legislative session, I found some unique plus sections, uncodified sections contained in a bill that was enacted, SB 1327, which enacts a private right of action against firearms manufacturers. And these plus sections, of course, are found at the end of the bill and are not codified statutory language. Sometimes these plus sections include things like an urgency clause, a special statute, a state mandated local program, a severability clause, etc. It can also include statements of legislative intent or other statutory interpretation guidelines. Now, these are, of course, sections of the bill, but they do not become sections of a code. Anyways, I thought that there were a couple of interesting provisions in SB 1327. I thought there were three of them in particular that are contained in section 3 of the bill. So the first one was subdivision A, or is subdivision A of section 3 of SB 1327. And A says, a statute that regulates or prohibits firearms shall not be construed to repeal any other statute that regulates or prohibits firearms, either wholly or partly, unless the later enacted statute explicitly states that it is repealing the other statute. So subdivision A specifies that a later enacted statute must explicitly state that the later enacted statute is repealing any other existing statute that either regulates or prohibits the use of firearms. In other words, the court should not view SB 1327 or any other state statute as repealing any other existing law unless 1327 or a later enacted statute clearly states that it's repealing an existing statute. The second one is subdivision B, which reads, a statute shall not be construed to restrict a political subdivision from regulating or prohibiting firearms in a manner that is at least as stringent as the laws of this state, unless the statute explicitly states that political subdivisions are prohibited from regulating or prohibiting firearms in the manner described by the statute. So this subdivision B specifies that a statute doesn't limit a city or a county from either regulating or prohibiting firearms in a way that's as stringent as the state law, unless the state law explicitly states that the city or county is prohibited from doing so. In other words, the court should not view SB 1327 or any other state law as precluding a city or a county from regulating or prohibiting firearms unless that state law clearly provides that it precludes a city or county from doing so. The third is subdivision C, which reads, every statute that regulates or prohibits firearms is severable in each of its applications to every person and circumstance. If any statute that regulates or prohibits firearms is found by any court to be unconstitutional, either on its face or as applied, then all applications of that statute that do not violate the United States Constitution and California Constitution shall be severed from the unconstitutional applications and shall remain enforceable notwithstanding any other law. And the statute shall be interpreted as if containing language limiting the statute's application to the persons, group of persons, or circumstance for which the statute's application will not violate the United States Constitution and California Constitution. Ooh, that's a lot. So subdivision C basically specifies that all state laws that regulate or prohibit firearms are to be viewed as separate and apart from any other provisions of the same statute. As a result, if a court finds that one provision of any statute regulating or prohibiting a firearm, then that one provision is no longer in effect, but the rest of the statute remains in place. Now, one question raised by this language is what's the meaning of in each of its applications to every person and circumstance? A normal severability clause does not contain this kind of language. This language in C attempts to limit the range of the unconstitutionality and keep a provision in place except for the narrow application that's at issue in a particular court challenge. Now, all three of these subdivisions are an effort by the legislature to try and limit how a court might view SB 1327 or a later enacted statute that regulates or prohibits firearms. Of course, as you should know, the courts can follow these statements and view them, in fact, as limiting the court's discretionary review, or they can reject these statements and interpret SB 1327 or any later enacted statutes in their own view. One interesting question raised by the language is whether state courts will accept any of these statements beyond a review of the language of SB 1327. In other words, the language that we read is only in SB 1327, but each subdivision references a statute or every statute rather than this statute, which would normally limit the legislative statements to an interpretation of this bill, that is 1327. So will the courts actually follow any of these statements if a court reviews some other statute in the future?